The legend of the Flatwoods Monster, though not widely known, has been a cultural influence since it was first encountered in 1952. The story has inspired works of fiction, art, toys, and video games. The Flatwoods Monster has been featured in many TV shows like history's Project Blue Book, and in video games like Fallout 76 and Ghostbusters World. Though Braxy, the Flatwoods Monster, has occasionally enjoyed the limelight, most interest in the legend has been relatively recent. In the years following the sighting, Braxy wasn't often mentioned. That is, until a forward-thinking group of young Braxton County residents had the idea to make the first novelty item based on the monster in the late 1960s. This is the story of Braxton County chapter of the JCs and the sordid tale of the Braxton County Monster Lantern. Hello there, my name is Mark Matzke, and I'm the narrator of the short film that you're watching, The Lantern by Andrew Smith. Andrew had become familiar with me through my work with Small Town Monsters, an independent production company based in Ohio that creates documentaries about strange and unusual topics. Andrew had also listened to the STM-related podcasts I co-hosted, Sasquatch, a show about Bigfoot, and Monsteropolis, so I guess he thought I might be the right fit for this project. I'm honored that he asked me, as this was my first voiceover work outside of the STM world, and so I'm doubly honored that he asked if I'd provide an audio commentary for The Lantern. As a movie nerd who collects DVDs and Blu-rays based on whether or not there's an audio commentary, and if so, who does it? This is kind of a dream come true for me, so thank you, Andrew. By the way, the documentaries I have narrated for STM include Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, Beast of Whitehall, the Director's Cut, On the Trail of Champ, directed by Alexander Petikoff, the Case Files episodes UFOs of the Ridge and the Kecksburg Incident, and the web series Sasquatch Unearthed, The Ridge. I've also served as co-writer on Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, Bray Road Beast, Momo the Missouri Monster, and Terror in the Skies, and have written 2 books, Making Monsters, the STM 5th Anniversary book, and the On the Trail of Companion, which is still available at smalltownmonsters.com, as are all the works I've just mentioned and more. I've also gone in front of the camera on numerous occasions, appearing as a commentator on the Trail of Bigfoot, On the Trail of UFOs, select episodes of On the Trail of Hauntings, Beyond the Trail, and the Bigfoot Project. You can catch me in a similar capacity in the upcoming Bloodlines, the Jersey Devil Curse. And I've done a tiny bit of acting in STM movies, playing Christian ministers in The Mark of the Bell Witch and Momo the Missouri Monster, which is a case of art imitating life, since I am an ordained Lutheran pastor. To bring us back to the real topic at hand, my acting began with Flatwoods Monster, A Legacy of Fear, in which my wife Sue and I played a couple who were menaced by the monster while driving down a dark, lonely road. Filming that scene was a blast, and I'll probably talk about it a little bit more in just a bit. But if you've seen the film, then you know that Andrew Smith makes an appearance as well, and he was instrumental in helping that movie get made. What Andrew has done with this project is really special, I think. He drills down into this one facet of what a town or region does to react to an unexplained event. Now, there are examples of this all throughout the United States. Go out to Northern California Oregon, Washington. You can get Bigfoot burgers, go to Bigfoot bookstores, visit Bigfoot museums and campgrounds, and so on. Fouke, Arkansas is home to the Monster Mart, an ever-expanding convenience store / Boggy Creek Museum. Point Pleasant, West Virginia is home to the Mothman Museum and Festival, which draws thousands of people from around the world. And this documentary shows us, as viewers, the way the lantern has become a sought-after collectible. And the figure serves as a remembrance of an exceedingly strange event that brought a great deal of notoriety to Flatwoods and Braxton County. Andrew really concentrates on the process of how these lanterns came to be and how they kind of took on a life of their own. As the demand was there, people wanted to buy one and still do. I think it's a glimpse into how stories like the Flatwoods Monster excite our imaginations, and how having an object like the Monster Lantern allows people to participate in the story in a way that's fun and safe. The Flatwoods Monster Museum in Sutton, West Virginia is another expression of this. And it's this kind of community-wide response to anomalies and weird stories that grabs the interest of the Small Town Monsters crew. And you can see that theme embedded in a lot of the work that Seth Breedlove and company has done. It's remarkable how one isolated incident can launch an icon into worldwide fame. It's equally fascinating to observe how stories grow in the telling, and especially in the retelling that naturally takes place over time. Ideas such as these were the basis of the STM film, The Flatwoods Monster, and gave the documentary a surprising amount of depth. As director Seth Breedlove said in a podcast interview, the underlying theme of The Flatwoods Monster is how legends are born and how actual events are turned into something completely different. And it's worth noting that the production itself followed a similar arc from one form to another. And here's what I mean. Originally, it was conceived as a 20-minute Case Files episode, Flatwoods Monster. And it looked to probe the mystery of a mechanical-looking something that was sighted by a group of people, mostly young men, on the night of September 12, 1952. Filming commenced in June of 2017, not long after Invasion on Chestnut Ridge had wrapped. And Seth had assembled a small group of interview subjects, but no principal witnesses were available. Now, one of those interview subjects, Andrew Smith, director of the Braxton County Tourist Information Center and Flatwoods Monster History Museum in Sutton, let Seth know that he'd heard through the grapevine that Fred May happened to be in town at the time, and this was a huge break. Fred had been a part of the group of eyewitnesses the night of September 12th, but he no longer resided in the area. Andrew said he could get Seth and Fred May together, and he kept his word. Although the exchange between Fred and Seth was cordial, Fred's response to Seth's invitation was to turn down the opportunity to go in front of the camera. Seth was disappointed, of course, yet not that surprised, and he remained in respectful contact with Fred May. Then, one day, Seth received the call that he had hoped for. Fred May was willing to go on record with his story. And that wasn't all. He wanted to conduct the interview at his brother Ed's property. And it seemed as though Ed was also willing to speak. Ed had been part of the group to see the green monster, but had never talked about his observations with anyone, including, as it turned out, his brother Fred. So Seth swung into action, arranged the conversations, recruited his father Ronnie to accompany him on the return trip to West Virginia, and both Fred and Ed agreed to have their stories recorded. which, among other things, meant that they could comment directly on the recollections of their mother, Kathleen May, who had become the most famous Flatwoods Monster eyewitness. Suddenly, the documentary had gone from an account about the incident to an account which included the testimony of those who had lived it. It was a tremendous development that transformed Seth's thought process about the movie's potential. Seth was also struck by the straightforward character of the May brothers, so much so that he said, "I'm usually skeptical about stories in our films, but I'm 100% convinced this happened." Their description isn't that unusual. It was of a strange hovering rocket. It sort of morphed with time into a 13-foot space alien that breathes fire, which is not what they encountered. They have nothing to gain from making this up. End quote. While most of the shoot itself went relatively smoothly, there was one fairly large wrinkle. The hill where the Flatwoods Monster was sighted is now part of a private farm whose owner wants nothing to do with the local legend. Numerous residents who saw Breedlove and crew warned them about the closed nature of the property and pointed out the copious no trespassing signs. Seth ultimately worked around the problem by gaining permission to use footage that had been shot in the early 2000s by a student filmmaker, when the location was under different ownership. Seth realized that expanding the Flatwoods Monster from featurette to more conventional length meant that he could be more creative in his approach. And to be precise, because of the era in which the Flatwoods case occurred, the early 1950s, it would be natural to place the account in the context of the UFO craze that was sweeping the nation at the time. This included the realm of movies. Seth was excited by the prospect of paying homage to the wave of flying saucer B-movies that came to characterize that decade, as well as the special effects of individuals such as Ray Harryhausen, and to do so in a way that fit the story. And actually, by acknowledging the role mass media played in transmitting information about the unexplained, he was supporting the main thesis of the film. It just happened to be a lot of fun to do so. And to that end, the Flatwoods Monster became the first STM production to feature the visual effects of Santino Vitale. Vitale supported the vision of a 50s film brought into the modern age by crafting a number of really amazing miniatures that illustrate key story points, and his work is so seamless that it's often difficult to tell what's artificial and what's not. This gave Flatwoods a flair that, when combined with Chris Scalf's Flatwoods Attack introduction and Matt Harris's depiction of a giant looming alien, was very arresting, very eye-catching for viewers. But the variety didn't stop there. Other classic techniques were used to bring the Flatwoods Monster to life, one of which was to construct the creature to the approximate specifications eyewitnesses had reported. Breedlove's brother-in-law was responsible for assembling the 13-foot, 500-pound monstrosity made of solid steel. And this is the figure glimpsed in the live-action recreations, which also feature Seth's nephews and other family members. This version of the Flatwoods Monster, as far as I know, still stands in the family backyard at an undisclosed location somewhere in Ohio. Another movie-making illusion used in Flatwoods is referred to as green screen, which is a way of compositing two images together based on color hues, and this was the first time the effect had been attempted in a STM movie. The scene was shot December 16, 2017, in a garage, with myself and my wife Sue playing the roles of a husband and wife who are being chased by a floating entity. Seth and cinematographer Zach Palmisano worked in really tight quarters to get the footage in and around a real-life classic car, and we were pantomiming reactions of abject fear and terror. And remembering the experience, my wife said it was a wonderful diversion to pre-Christmas craziness. When my family and friends bemoaned their holiday busyness, I was able to just say, "Oh, that's the weekend I was in our friend's movie." Sue also contributed a vocal performance as Kathleen May, which is heard during one of the recreations. Brandon Dalo's score is cinematic in the best possible sense, and his theme for the Flatwoods Monster, heard prominently during the attack intro, is particularly memorable. The Flatwoods Monster, A Legacy of Fear, premiered at the Elk Theater in Sutton, West Virginia on April 7th, 2018 to a sold-out crowd, leading Andrew Smith to say in an interview with the West Virginia Observer, "We're hoping to be able to play the documentary every anniversary of the sighting. It is well made and will bring people in to learn about the monster." John Gibson mentions both Gray Barker and Neil Nunley in his interview, so I thought it might be interesting to hear a bit of Barker's writing. In a section of his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, Barker describes his interaction with Nunley, who was 14 years old at the time, and as you'll hear, it's Nunley's sincerity that helps move Barker away from his skepticism. This section begins with Barker finding out about the Flatwoods Monster sighting by reading the newspaper. Police say Braxton Monster, product of mass hysteria. Sutton, September 14th. 7 Braxton County residents vowed today that a Frankenstein monster with B.O. drove them from a hilltop near here, but police figured the smelly boogeyman was the product of, quote, mass hysteria, unquote. The thing, described by witnesses as a half-man, half-dragon, had not been reported seen since Friday night, but residents of the area said a foul odor still clung to the hilltop yesterday. All of this started when Mrs. Kathleen May of Flatwoods said she and 6 boys, one a 17-year-old National Guardsman, climbed the hill to investigate her 2 small sons' report that a flying saucer landed there. She said they found a fire-breathing monster 10 feet tall with a bright green body and a blood-red face that waddled toward them with a bouncing, floating motion and sent them scurrying down the hillside. She said that the monster exuded an overpowering odor like metal that so sickened them they vomited for hours afterward. It looked worse than Frankenstein, said Mrs. May. It couldn't have been human. Barker writes, no wonder, in a listing of the 10 biggest feature stories of the year, was as judged by ABC, this phenomenon was described later as the landlocked Loch Ness Monster. No wonder West Virginians, often credited with going barefoot, were heartily laughed at once again around the nation. I didn't believe the story myself. But then I reasoned, a story as good as this one surely had some basis in fact. Such a story should be exposed if it were a hoax. Better still, I might get some publicity out of it. Barker then describes going to the area of Flatwoods and then locates Neil Nunley. He writes, I was less skeptical after talking to the Nunley boy, one of the eyewitnesses, and the observer nearest the monster when it was discovered. He tells the story without emotion, a story devoid of holes. If I can tell it as he did, I'm sure you'd believe every word of it as I did. Neil Nunley is unspoiled by sophistication. He talks with the honest accent of West Virginia farm people, caught halfway between their staccato-voiced neighbors to the north and the sleepier drawl of the south. He had read no science fiction, though in school the year before, a teacher had read the class something, probably an account of a saucer sighting, from a true magazine, but if it was true, you couldn't hardly believe it. He and some other youths were at a nearby playground when they saw the strange object flash across the sky. The boys were unanimous in disagreeing with Jordan about its color and shape. They said it looked like a silver dollar going through the sky, and that it was not elongated. A trail of fire did shoot out behind it, however. The object was flying low just above the hilltop over which it hovered, and looked like a door falling down flatwise. After it fell, they could see the light at the hilltop. Overwhelming curiosity overtook them, so they hurried, gathered a party, ran up the railroad track toward the foot of the hill. They stopped at Mrs. May's house to get a flashlight, for it was then almost dark. The two May children described the object to their mother, who didn't believe them until she went to the porch and saw the light pulsing from dim to bright on the hill. She agreed to go with them. Motivation for the investigation was not to discover the terror that awaited them. There was little fear. It was mainly a lark. They thought it was surely a meteorite, and they might see what it looked like. Even when they encountered a strange mist near the hilltop, now smelling faintly like some kind of gas, they were not greatly perturbed. They had no idea what they were running onto. Just at the hilltop there is a fence from which the gate has rotted away. This gateway is a vantage point from which can be seen the entire limits of the happening, none of which are more than 100 feet away. It was here the lemon boy shrieked with terror, fell backward, the entire party fled. It looked worse than Frankenstein, Mrs. May said later. As long as I live, I wish I had never seen it. Well, that's about it for my commentary for Andrew Smith's The Lantern. I would, of course, encourage you to visit Sutton, West Virginia, and the Flatwoods Monster Museum, which is featured throughout this documentary. You can learn more by visiting braxie.com, that's BRAXXIE.com, or braxtonwv.org. Thanks again to Andrew for the invitation to be involved twice in the telling of this tale, and thank you for watching and listening.